Again, my name is Alan McNair. I am the founder and president of McNair Retained Search. We're located in Asheville, North Carolina. Prior to starting my own firm, we specialize in leadership roles and C-level positions. I was with one of the largest executive search firms in the nation for 23 years, and have placed over 700 individuals in that 25-year period. And over the years, one of my passions has become pre-construction. Pre-construction, I feel, injects a real dose of sanity into the construction industry. I feel like that if it wasn't for the pre-con guys of the world, that the operation folks would probably either implode or explode. I'm not sure which. And so I truly believe you guys, as you know, have a symbiotic relationship, needing each other. And if it wasn't for the operations guys, then who knows, you might spend very well the rest of your days sketching out conceptual estimates on the back of a napkin at a Waffle House. Hopefully not. But anyway, seriously, moving on to the topic of the day, when Jack Parker contacted me, it's been a couple of months ago, about speaking. He had found me from an article I'd written maybe 7 or 8 years ago called "Why Fly Fishing is Like Pre-Construction." I had come up with the meat of that article from interviewing 6 different pre-con leaders whom I had placed in my region. And so none of the ideas were my own. They were gleaned from whom I consider the best of the best, and shared those ideas in the article, "Why Fly Fishing is Like Pre-Construction." My authority to speak today is based on my experience, and literally having talked with thousands of pre-con guys and gals over the years. That is my only authority. So I thank all of you, and hats off to you. I do consider pre-construction managers is the real artist of the industry, in the same way that a painter paints a beautiful painting and ends up potentially with a masterpiece. You gentlemen, you women and men out there are painting a beautiful, you're getting the project off on the right foot. And if the operations folks do their part, then you should have a seamless transition from project pursuit to project delivery. So hats off to all of you. But without any further to do, I'll move into the meat of the topic today. I'd like to share 4 examples. The first would be how one company who did not have a pre-con department had a goal to create a world-class pre-construction department and be able to compete with all the largest firms in their area, and how they did that successfully. The second example would be how a company secured a $1 billion project in the middle of a recession through a creative pricing methodology, and allowing the ownership to fall into the hands of the owner, allowing them to judge their performance and base their fee based on a grading system. The third example I'd like to share would be how one contractor was awarded a $100 million university job based on a creative method they used in the pre-construction part of the presentation. And then finally, what are the leadership skills of leading your department? Other than the day-to-day operations of managing your people, doing takeoffs as need be if that falls underneath your umbrella. What are the key leadership qualities needed in building, being out in the community, in your building community, forging partnerships with your subcontractors and with your clients, designers, and with your owners as well. But regardless of what you're doing, I think, as you all know well, it all starts with listening. Just like in Southern cooking, the main ingredient always seems to be pig fat. That seems to be what everybody likes. That's what makes food taste good in our region, and that seems to be the main ingredient. In the same way, Listening in the pre-construction process is really key. I was talking to an executive the other day, and he said, if you take the word listen and you scramble the letters, what word does it spell? So that's a quiz to you all. Let's see who can come up with it. If you take the word listen, scramble the letters, and what word does it spell? I know you like these types of problems because you're a strategic thinker if you're a pre-construction manager. Does anyone have an answer? Obviously, the answer to that riddle is it spells silent. So it starts with listening and listening to the stakeholders, i.e. the owners, the contractors, the designers, and then after finding out what's really, really important to them, what is their hot button, then tailor making a pre-construction plan that strategically meets their needs in a way that that they can relate to. So moving on to the example, I took a search with a client about 7 or 8 years ago, and they wanted to build a world-class pre-construction department. And they said that they had experimented with a pre-con department by the use of a project manager, and it was wildly successful, way more successful than they ever thought of. And they thought, well, if we can have this type of success with a project manager who was quite sharp, no doubt, but if we could do it with a non-pre-con manager, imagine the success that we could have with a real pre-construction manager. And so we started the interview process. One of the candidates whom we interviewed, his passion is pre-construction. I placed him with a large national contractor, and he says that he gets up in the morning and his reason for going to work is to change the way pre-construction is done in the construction industry. He is absolutely passionate. And so as he was interviewing with the client, and the client was interviewing him, of course, he was interviewing them as well. At the end of the first interview, he asked, he kind of had a test. And his test was he wanted to determine how serious they were about building a world-class department. And so he put together a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet had five categories, 5 vertical categories, and they were pre-construction, construction, post-construction, business development, and I believe it was marketing. And his assumption was that if they really wanted to build a world-class pre-construction department, there were certain table stakes in order to compete with the big boys and the big girls in their region. These are 100 million plus companies that are up to the billions that they're going head to head with. There were certain table stakes you had to have. And the idea being was to build a world-class department. We didn't need to have them all day one, but we need to have a plan to roll them out over, say, a 1 to 5 year period. And you know what all those table stakes are. If you're not involved in the art of CM at risk delivery and you're not getting projects, you need to figure out how to do that. If BIM technology would be another, and Revit, and on and on and on. And so he laid it all out. He developed a plan, and then their response back to him let him know the seriousness of their intent to build a world-class department. And they got back in a very methodical way, just as he had presented, and they were willing to do whatever it takes to build that department, to be able to go head-to-head with those competitors. Make a long story short, that was about 8 years ago. They were doing $75 million a year. Today, that same contractor is doing $400 million a year. 100% of their work is negotiated work, and they have their main office, and then a second office, and a third office, and a fourth office. So they actually have 4 offices, whereas 8 years ago they had 1 office. Gone from 75 million to 400 million, and so the proof is the pudding, they say, is in the real taste of the pudding. Having a strategic plan, obviously, that has to be sold to your CEO, to your president, But that was a wonderful example, I thought, on how to pull out all the stops to build a great department. The second example I'd like to share was a client who took me on a tour of the project. It was a very large project. It was a $1 billion, with a B, $1 billion massive gut and rehab. It was a government job. It was taken and awarded during one of the last recessions that we had. I think it would have been about, it was a pretty major recession, post 9/11, 2001. We had a recession, as you may recall, after 9/11 for about 3 to 5 years. And that project was actually underway in the beginning when 9/11, when the World Trade Towers came down, and continued for several years. So that project kind of carried them through in a pretty massive economic slowdown. But we're touring this job, and I said, wow, this is quite the project. And $1 billion. I said, how in the world did you win this job? And they said, that's a really good question. And they said, what we did is we took the job for a 0% fee. And being a novice, not knowing much about construction, I am a recruiter. That's what I do. I'm a talent scout. I said, well, how in the world do you make money as a company taking a 0% fee? He says, that's a good question also. He says, what we did is we put together, I think he said 8 different benchmarks for achievement. And every week, the owner would score each one of the 8 benchmarks. Like, for example, safety. Schedule was a really big deal on this project. Quality, price, and I'm sure there was 4 or 5 others. And but there's about 8 altogether. And for each of the benchmarks, they would receive a fractional percentage of their fee for achieving it at a level that the owner was happy with. So they would judge this every single week. And when it was all said and done, they earned a 50% fee higher than they normally would in an extremely competitive market. And one of the main reasons they were able to pull this off was because of the working together with the subcontractor market in a collaborative way. They had been building relationships with these subs. The subs knew them, they trusted them, and they were willing to give them their best price during the preliminary pricing stage of pre-construction. They gave them their very best price, knowing that on bid day that the contractor would honor the price that was given on bid day and not work so hard to buy the job out and beat them up on their price, or worse than that, shop their prices, because they knew them and they trusted them based on their previous experience. And they had been cultivating that subcontractor relationships for probably 3 years. This contractor, which is a national contractor and one of the best in the U.S., in my opinion, they had come into this market relatively recently, very competitive market, and they had to do something different from and better than from what everyone else was doing. And the subs had a history of being really beat up, and they were highly suspect of a new contractor in town. But they showed them over and over again that when you give us a pre-con price, that's going to be the price that we're going to award you on bid day. And they did it over and over again. So as a result, the contractor gets a better bid day price. The subcontractor knows that they can achieve the margins that they want to, and they form a partnership, and it's a win-win for everyone. So those were kind of 2 methods they used in order to be awarded this job. And then the pricing method, which carried from the contracting relationships they had built subcontracting, kind of carried them through and allowed them to be sustainable during the during the recession. The third example, I came on a much smaller job. It was a $100 million job. It's a university job. And I asked the executive vice president, that's quite the job. That also happened during a recession. And I said, how were you awarded this job? And he said, you know why we were awarded the job? He says, I'll tell you. He said, actually, the owner came up to me after the pre-construction presentation and after the job had been awarded. And he said, you know why we awarded you this job? And he said, no, why? He says, it's because of your presentation that you did on energy. You were really listening to us when we told you that energy was the number one thing we were interested in, an energy efficient building. And we wanted to see how that was going to be incorporated in the delivery of the project. And so what they had done is they brought in a energy expert from the West Coast who is in-house, and he put together a wonderful presentation. He met the owner's needs as they had requested. He tailor-made that presentation to meet the owner's needs. He absolutely nailed it, and because of that, they were awarded a $100 million university job. You know, in the same way, if you do healthcare work, everyone in healthcare knows that probably, at least it used to be, the number one hot button, maybe today is changing with COVID, maybe the number one hot button for not only healthcare construction, but all construction, regardless, depending upon when this COVID thing goes away or another pandemic comes along, is going to be disease control and containment. So, you know, how that relates to HVA systems and everything else, you guys are the pros, so you know better than I. But obviously in healthcare construction, the number one hot button of most clients historically, from what I understand, has been no patient interruption whatsoever. And so obviously a presentation needs to be designed around that in the pre-construction process. And then finally, the fourth example I'd like to use is not a project delivery or project pursuit example, but really a leadership trait. Again, true story from the field. I was talking to an executive, he's a regional manager. He called me one day and he said, Alan, he said, I think I need to replace my pre-con manager. I said, really? I said, I know who you're talking about. I said, he's got a great reputation, and why do you want to replace him? And that's a hard call to get. You know, it's what I do day in and day out, but I get those calls like that from time to time. And he said, he got kind of quiet and he said, you know, I really, really like him. He said, he's a great estimator. You know, he's been doing this forever. But I'm really, really frustrated. He said, I said, why? He said, every single day he has lunch at his desk. And I said, that seems like a pretty good idea. I have lunch at my desk. Why not? And he said, you know, he says, that's a problem. He says, the reason it's a problem, we're in a very competitive market. And he needs to be taking a subcontractor to lunch, a designer, a past owner, somebody. He needs to be building relationships. He needs to be out in the community with our stakeholders so that when requesting a price on a job, he's got that relationship. You know, this is a people business. He went on to say that, I think he said that businesses don't build buildings, that people build buildings. And we've got to have the relationship. But and I'm sure it was a challenge for him, as it is you, to be out in the community. You've got a whole set of plans all over your desk and a million things you need to do. You got to manage your department and meet these deadlines and value engineer, all this stuff, conceptual. It is a challenge, but he really felt like that needed to be his number one priority, to be out in the community and building those relationships. So that's about all I have to share, and I think that the time will allow. But thanks again for allowing me to share a few examples, and I'd like to open it up for Q&A time for the rest of our session. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alan, for that great talk. That was really interesting. I particularly liked when you asked to re-scramble the words listen. It took me a while to get it, but I think there was 2 audience members who got it right. That was Ryan and Jordan. So that was silence in there. That was really great talk. Thank you so much. So yes, as Alan just said, we are now going to start a live Q&A section. So if you do have any questions for Alan, then please do post them in the stage chat. The first question that's come in for you, Alan, is actually, where can I find the article, Why Fly Fishing is Like Pre-Construction?
You can find that on my website. Go to McNairgroup.com, and that's MACNAIR group.com, McNairgroup.com, MACNAIR, and you can pull it up there.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So I don't know if you actually got a chance to see some of the other presentations that happened today, but there was a presentation from Steve Watkins earlier in this track, and he actually talked about something that you touched upon in your last example there, and that was working with people who potentially may have different personality traits or maybe don't get on with the rest of their team. So I'm actually going to ask you a question that came up in Steve's session, and I hope that's okay. And the question was, how do you handle the personality differences when pairing, for example, the baby boomers working with millennials or Gen Z? I don't know whether you had any comment on that, or if you had any advice maybe when you're working with different personalities.
And rephrase that again, if you would, Millie. How do you specifically relate to the baby boomers, which would be my generation? I'm 60 years old. To the younger generation, is that right? How do you bridge that gap?
Exactly. Yeah, correct.
Okay. You know, that's a big dilemma. But it's a challenge. You know, I think that the younger folks, I've got a couple of young gentlemen that work with me. One is 29 and the other is 32 years old. I think that the personality of a pre-construction manager is, if anyone can figure out how to reach those folks between 20 and 30 or less than 40 years old, it's pre-construction managers. They are a great pre-construction manager, as we all know, is risk averse. They tend to look at the challenges and the problems in advance, and then they'll maybe reverse engineer it and attack the problem in that way. And I think that most of the younger generation, I've got 6 children myself, under 32, between 18 and 32, they're very suspect. They don't trust easily, and they believe that the taste of that the proof of the pudding is in the taste of the pudding, as they say. And so it reminds me of the motto of North Carolina. I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and our motto, our state motto, is to be rather than to seem. It's to be rather than to seem. It's to be authentic, to be real, and that's who pre-con guys are at their core. That's what I love about them. They're the real deal. They tell it like it is. They're not grandstanders. So if anybody can relate and mentor and bridge the gap between the younger generation and the older generation, it's the mindset of a pre-construction manager.
Perfect. Thank you, Alan. A question's just come through. So when you are of the younger crowd, what steps can you take to move toward pre-con?
Okay, what steps can you take with the younger crowd to move towards pre-con? And rephrase that, if you would, please.
Yep, so that's exactly that's what it is. It's basically they're asking if you're of a younger crowd, so a younger generation, what are the steps that they can take to make that move towards pre-con?
Okay, like in their career, in their career development. Okay.
Yes, yeah, I think that's where that question's coming.
I think that it would start with a personality, a psychometric testing of some sort. All the companies use those. There's the predictive index. There's the Bessemer test. There's the disc profile. There's lots of varieties of testing to determine whether they would test out well to have the pre-construction personality and the mindset. I think that's number one. And I really believe in those tests. I have rarely seen a pre-construction manager who he or she was really good at what they do that did not test out in that way. There's nothing more frustrating than finding a project manager at 38 years old, and I can tell just from talking with him that he has no business being a project manager, that he was really designed and engineered for pre-construction. You can kind of smell it when you're talking to him. And, I encourage him to go ahead and make that switch if he can, but it's really difficult to switch at 38 or 40 years old. You're far better off, like you said, Millie, is to start right when you get out of college and get on the pre-con math as a path as a junior estimator, senior estimator, pre-con manager. But it all starts, I think, with testing.
Okay, great. And following on from that test, we've had a question come in to say, what disc personality is suited for pre-con?
What personality? Methodical. He or she's probably got a bit of an introverted personality. He or she is going to be a great listener. One of the things I'm working on as a recruiter, obviously, I'm trying to improve in listening. I really am. That's why I gave you the little quiz about scrambling the letters and coming up with silent. One of my clients actually quizzed me on that, so I'm really actively working at it. But by their very nature, pre-construction managers are really good listeners. So methodical, introverted, a good listener. They call that in the Midwest. I was talking to a client. I know we're about out of time, a couple more minutes, but I love stories. I relate to things in stories. And the guy interviewed with the client, and he said on the debrief on the call, I said, well, how you think you did with so-and-so contractor? He says, I don't think they liked me. I said, really? I said, why? He says, there were these long, uncomfortable pauses. I said, really? He says, it was like I'd go, hello, are you there? And they would go, yeah, we're here. And I said, so that's why you thought they didn't like you? And he was one of those personalities that's kind of can't stand silence, got to keep filling up the space. So I called the client and I said, what did you think of so-and-so candidate? And they said, we really, really like him. I said, really? He thought you couldn't stand him. And he goes, why? And these are, they are in the belt buckle of the Midwestern U.S., right? Which they're known for few words. What's the motto of the Missouri, the show me state, right? Show me, don't tell me, show me state. And it didn't happen in Missouri, but near Missouri. And he says, there are these long, uncomfortable pauses, and he thought you didn't like him. And they said in their old Midwest, very unassumptive way, they said, here in the Midwest, we don't have a problem with pauses. So that's one way you could tell if somebody's a good listener, if they'll hear you out and then not respond immediately. But yeah, those are some qualities that hopefully that helps, Millie.
No, that really does. Thank you, Alan. That was a really great live Q&A. So thank you so much. If you do have any more questions for Alan, but we didn't get time to ask them, please do reach out to Alan in the People tab. You can directly message him and hopefully he'll be able to answer some of those questions for you.